Hello and welcome to this webinar where today I'll be talking about 5 common compliance mistakes, how to avoid them, and what the root causes can be within an organization. Hopefully this will be useful for you. So a quick introduction from myself. I'm a privacy and GDPR compliance specialist at Predetect with a primary focus on the UK market. So in a regular day, you'll find me advising on issues related to data protection in the UK, matters related to the PCR, DPA, and of course the big one in 2021, the UK GDPR to GDPR situation. I have a background in management consulting, legal advisory, which allows me to take kind of business-driven approach and make privacy simple. Next, we're going to take a quick look at an agenda and then see what we're going to run through in the next, I would say, half an hour or so. So here we go. So firstly, we're going to look at a few root causes of compliance mistakes to give you a bit of background, and then on to the 5 common mistakes we've highlighted, a quick case study, and some key takeaways, and finally a little Q&A at the end if anyone has any questions. So throughout the webinar, you'll be able to type out questions in the little GoToWebinar box that should be on your screen, and I'll be able to see those at the end. And hopefully we'll be able to tackle some of those. So also the slides will be sent out as well as a recording of this. So if you have to drop out for some reason, no problem. And right, let's get into it. So problems with effective compliance within a company can be quite wide, but the 3 most common that I come across in organizations with some form of established data protection program, the kind of 3 you can see here. So firstly, there'll be focus issues. And so by this, I mean there will be some confusion where the DPO or compliance manager should be focusing their energy within the company. So should it be a certain set of employees who touch the most sensitive data? Should it be a specific department like IT, or perhaps even a focus on one regulation, for example, the GDPR, and then you may overlook other regulations. So it's a tricky issue, and it involves a lot of internal organizational awareness, I would say, in order to perfect that. That would mean organizing into departmental efforts to map the data flows and have a really good understanding of where you should be focusing your efforts. So this leads on to the second cause, which you'll see these are kind of all linked together at the end of the day. So you need to take a kind of high level look at it, and that's lack of internal communication. It's important to remind employees that everyone's a part of the compliance process, not just the team that deals with sensitive data or a certain department, etc. The point I'm making here is not only is communicating this information to employees important, but ensuring that the level of communication is maintained. So what you could do is perhaps a one-off audit that could provide you with some good information. But if you can get all departments and employees to keep data protection in the back of their mind, then your organization will be in a much better place generally. And then finally, and very much appropriately, I would say, for 2021 is the legal and regulatory landscape changes. Of course, when I say that, you're thinking of Brexit, of course, but outside of that, we have various decisions from the EU courts. Think the Schrems rulings that invalidated the Privacy Shield as an example, and they have a real practical impact on how your organization should approach data protection, the data flows, all of that. So with these 3 in mind, I want you to keep these 3 in mind as we go through these various mistakes here. We'll see how they can impact an organization by jumping into the 5 common mistakes. Here we go. So firstly, we have a common failure, which is realizing that compliance is an ongoing task. This is one of the first things I usually remind clients when they come on board with Predetect, actually, and we're looking into their specific compliance needs. So the quote here says, achieving quote unquote compliance is a great achievement in and of itself, which it is, but really it's only demonstrating you've reached the base requirements once. Beyond this, you have to maintain the compliance with the aforementioned changes to the regulatory landscape in mind. So as well as this, you have to consider how a business will naturally develop over time, of course. The example we have here is forgetting to update a policy when a new tool or third-party provider is employed. This could impact a wide range of things. Think maybe, I'll go back to the example from the previous slide. you bring on a new US-based provider, and for that you'd have to consider the ramifications of the Schrems II ruling. So to fix this problem, the mistake, it sounds quite simple in practice, but I guarantee that enforcing this and making it a kind of mindset within your organization will be rather difficult, and that only multiplies by organization size. You'll want to regularly review your data protection measures and internal processes and update them when necessary. So like I said, it sounds simple, but achieving this, especially in a larger organization, achieving this cross-departmental cohesion is not as easy as it sounds. You have to ensure that communication levels are high, people are well aware of their data protection obligations in order to guarantee internal compliance. So a practical tip could be to conduct bi-yearly internal kind of mini audits. You have to be careful not to overdo the compliance requirements, as I'm sure many of you will have met some resistance in the past. But getting people on the same page is extremely important, and this kind of small internal audit wouldn't have kind of outside ramifications, but it could potentially highlight issues and ensure employees are aware of what a real audit would involve, and you could be prepared for that. So now on to number 4 here. Let's see, next slide. There we go. So number 4 is more of a niche mistake. What you'll notice through these 5 mistakes is that I've gone from kind of top down with a big wide approach issues, and then down to really niche things. So you'll have to see what you can apply to your organization. So this is definitely something that the consultants at Predetect see pretty frequently. It's important to note here that every company should have a solid IT security policy in place, and that this policy may include information relating to data protection, but that doesn't mean it's a replacement. So the IT department will usually be the target of these mistakes, with them having a lot of compliance matters to consider from their data security standpoint. Think maybe ISO compliance, technical measures, all the way to them having a need for a kind of standard GDPR understanding. But this being said, data protection does require a notable effort from all employees dealing with sensitive data, and cybersecurity covers safety against cyber attack, while data protection covers everything from storage to management, access control, data process, etc. To deal with this, a compliance program should be implemented by the compliance manager, apologies, that not only covers the data security, but also privacy. And of course, having the IT department involved in the creation of this would be great. But also the other departments will be required for things like data mapping and figuring out who touches the sensitive data where. Consider the following scenario, I would say, where marketing makes outbound calls for a health service. The marketing department will clearly have access to some information that could be classified as sensitive, and to simply focus on the IT department would, in this example, be a gross oversight. It's easy to fall into this trap once you, as the DPO or compliance manager, begins the long and arduous task of evaluating the security and IT side of compliance. So you've got to really make sure you don't get swamped and overwhelmed and sidetracked from the kind of main goal you're achieving with your program that you're trying to implement. Now we're going to go on to number 3. So here we have number 3, which is probably the point I personally find most interesting. And this is to focus too much on the process of data protection itself. So by doing this, you miss out on potential organizational benefits. So consider this: you create your compliance program for the organization, and people appear to be following it. This is great. So now you can look beyond that. How can you optimize the processes you've gathered in your register of processing activities? What benefit and value can you bring to the various departments with the information you have? And you've got to remember, at this point, with the program in place, done, being followed, you're likely one of the people in the organization that has one of the most holistic understandings of the business, and you should be using that to your advantage. So optimize a process, cut out a middleman, increase output. All of these things can be done by reviewing the program and business with a kind of pragmatic mindset. and it can potentially save the organization a lot of time and a lot of money. Beyond this, you can look at the company culture when you implement a policy. And it doesn't have to be another time sink for employees if you appropriately introduce privacy by design. I'm sure you've heard the term, you may try and incorporate, but this method of introducing compliance as part of the company culture provides a massive benefit to the organization in terms of data protection, as well as benefiting the employees by making them think about potential compliance issues in their day-to-day work lives. So not only will this benefit you as the compliance manager or DPO, it'll also benefit the organization, as well as provide the individual employees with a great mindset for approaching their work. So to implement this or fix it if it's not there is not super clear. It's not extremely obvious. The basic advice would be to apply operational and regulatory requirements with a strict focus on your business context. What is the organization trying to achieve? What is the best way to do that while still obviously maintaining your compliance? And with this in mind, you can easily optimize and improve beyond just introducing policies. So to do this, beginning the process of creating a compliance program with privacy by design in mind will help you a lot later on and really allow you to kind of go beyond the compliance process itself. So finally, I would say as a compliance manager or DPO in this context, you need to be really approachable for this to work. A lot of what I've talked about sounds great in theory, but to get it to happen in practice requires the previously mentioned strong levels of communication between the various departments, which simply won't be possible if people are dreading talking to the point of contact. Fostering that internal culture is obviously extremely important, and that starts with the person who's trying, or team, who's trying to develop it. So now we're going to go on to number 2, which is undervaluing the importance of involving employees. So this is a classic mistake. Not all companies ensure that employees are aware of their obligations under the various regulations. And I don't want to say old, but the more traditional approach of sending out an employee handbook packed with 50 different policies is generally not the way to go about this. The reason this is unfortunately still relevant is that many of the incidents and penalties, think fines, come from non-compliance with regulations that could have easily been solved by training. And so the quick solution is if I provide you with all of this information in one go in the employee handbook, it's not my problem anymore. So to fix this, there's a clear solution, and that is educate employees, as I said. So remember why you may have a good understanding of the legal requirements as the DPO or the compliance manager. And maybe we can even go as far as to say that marketing may know some of the rules and IT may know some of the technical requirements as part of their job. To assume they know specifics is a potential huge oversight. So I'm not saying that handing out policies is a bad decision. There are plenty of people who will review that information, they'll internalize that information, but that's not everyone. And to guarantee this happens, believe training is the best way. This may be like, for example, Predetect's external training, where we offer online learning with videos, presentations, and small tests. Or it could mean internal workshops from the compliance manager or compliance department, DPO, and they could be held with the various departments. So it could be broken down into sets. You could have a workshop with the marketing department, you could have a workshop with HR, etc. But whichever way you approach it, education is a key part of any data protection program that feeds directly into the privacy by design, which was mentioned on the last slide. This is very simple, but it's also very important. The solution is simply educate, educate, educate. Now, number 1, the last one here, again, this is a rather specific one. As I said, I tried to go for a handful of broad concerns and a few more detailed examples. And this is something we've had a lot of questions about from large companies. So large companies with DPOs all the way to kind of much smaller companies who may assume that now the UK is no longer part of Europe, that GDPR does not apply. So obviously, unfortunately, that's not the case. And as the UK is looking to uphold the, I quote, same high standards that the European Union brings with the GDPR to get the adequacy decision. I won't go into this too much as it's a bit off topic, but clearly a positive decision for Britain would benefit a lot of businesses in the same way the old Privacy Shield did to the US, pre-Schrems 2, of course. So as to whether I personally think this decision will be reached, it's really uncertain. The IPA, the Investigatory Powers Act 2016, is of course a big problem because it more or less copies the FISA 702 laws over in the States. So we'll have to wait and see. Fortunately, the European Union agreed to the 4 to 6 month bridge, which I guess will temporarily allow the transfer of data. And while this is good, it has led to some confusion regarding the EU representative, which is this slide here. And this really ties into going back to one of the first slides, the regulatory and legal landscape changes. So the appointment of a representative appears to be irrespective of an adequacy decision. Therefore, whether or not the European Commission arrive at a positive decision in relation to the UK during the next 4-6 months, I think it's near 4 months now, of the bridge, it doesn't affect the need to appoint a UK or EU representative. And whilst it doesn't confirm this specifically, largely I suspect because adequacy is not even a factor in the decision, information on the ICO appears to indicate this is the case. So this means you definitely need to find an EU rep, and fortunately there are plenty of services that offer this, such as Predetect, and it doesn't involve a huge amount of effort from the organization to set up. So this is a kind of a more practical example of the legal and regulatory changes. What have we got now? Now we have a case study. So a big case study coming out of the UK, you may be familiar with the case, is Ticketmaster. So the company that provides ticket sales and distribution. And they were fined £1.25 million or $1.6 million by the ICO for failing to keep the personal data of customers secure. So the ICO found that the company did not place appropriate security measures for the prevention of the cyber attack on a chatbot that it had installed on its online payment page, which amounted to a breach of GDPR. So the inclusion of the chatbot itself, hosted by a third party, which I believe was iBenter or Inbenter Technologies, on Ticketmaster's online payment page, enabled an attacker to access the financial data of customers, and this was all found out in the investigation. So what do we see here? A few of the points I've mentioned, which is a clear lack of communication between the departments internally, data protection, so maybe compliance, depending on how they've got it set up internally, and then IT and marketing. And also a lack of involvement from the employees. Sorry. So with the privacy by design approach, it's extremely unlikely that this would have occurred at all. This really provides a practical angle to some of the mistakes from earlier that appear quite trivial or simple. They do impact all kinds of companies and are not limited to just small ones. Your first assumption would be that this would never happen normally, but clearly that's not the case at all. And let's go on to the final slide, which is the key takeaways. And there's a lot that could have been included here, but to avoid rehashing the same information and to keep this short and sweet, that is the plan with this webinar. These are the 5 things that if you're going to take anything away from this session, take these away. So 1, to ensure compliance, make sure it's a company-wide task. And 2, make sure that employees are educated. These two alone will get you a really long way in terms of the internal compliance journey. So then we've got 3. Remember, data protection is not a one-off exercise, and that 4 DPOs and compliance managers can provide a lot of value to the business outside of simple policy creation, etc. And finally, communication is key. I think that's probably the most important takeaway, and it's something that seems very simple, but to actually introduce it is not as easy as it sounds. Now I'm going to quickly run through, I believe I have a couple slides in here, run through Predetect's offering, and then I'll check to see if we have any questions. So what have we got? Here we go. So the Predetect platform makes it really easy to identify risks and protect data. It's a SaaS, software as a solution platform for all of your data protection needs. And it allows you to do things such as identify risks, monitor all of your ongoing risks and alert and indicate changes, updates, tasks, etc. Then we have, we also offer external DPO services or EU representation. And this comes from our team of DPOs that help you implement the necessary regulatory compliance framework. And as you can see here, we've got a little screenshot. As you can see, the software itself allows you to do a lot of things within the platform. So that could be monitoring your organization's compliance with GDPR and other offerings. We provide personalized advice for your company, and that will be automating risk identification, data mapping, tasks, different protocols, things like that. And finally, introducing good practices, data subject rights management, security breaches, etc. And then finally we have here, I won't go through all of these because there's quite a few, but it's just a list of some of the functions and features that the Predetect platform can provide you with. So that will cover everything from DPIAs, impact assessments, to risks, gap analysis, evaluating your international transfers, data breach management, website compliance, etc. And finally, of course, we have the external services like a external DPO or EU representation, etc. So if you like the sound of that, or you'd be interested in finding out more, then don't hesitate to get in touch for a free demo, and we would love to hear from you. So this is the final slide here. Let's see if we have any questions. What have we got? We're planning to expand physically to Europe in a number of months, but currently do not have an office there. Do we need an EU representative now, or can we wait? So that's an interesting question, but I would highly recommend you get an EU representative until you're established in that member state in the EU. We can't know how practical it is that the ICO or European Authority will be checking, but for the relatively small cost of an EU representative and the GDPR requirements, it would definitely be my recommendation to get one. You should have got one on at the beginning of January, just as the transition period changed. But with the bridge, I guess there is some leeway, but the advice would definitely be to do that as soon as possible. What else have we got? How to get departments involved? Okay, so I assume you mean in the compliance process in a practical way. So I'll answer in that regard. So a compliance manager or DPO should act as a resource to employees, right? And then in turn, they can form relationships with people or functions of a company that they'll need to support in order to introduce the different compliance policies and guidelines in order to achieve the kind of full compliance. So let me give you an example. So for example, data protection training. This sounds rather theoretical, but the best way is to communicate and get people to understand what you're trying to achieve. If it's seen as an arduous task by the various departments, they're not going to be as engaged. But I would recommend next week we are doing a webinar on engaging employees. So I would recommend you check in on that because it will answer this question in obviously a lot more detail. But yeah, my conclusion, my kind of summary of that would be definitely see the DPO, compliance department, compliance manager as a resource for employees, and then go from there. And then the implementation will go a lot better. What else have we got? Hello, my understanding is that we don't need to appoint an EU rep if we have branches in the EU. So yeah, so the requirements of for the EU rep are, of course, maybe I should have clarified that a bit. That was perhaps my fault there. If you have if you're established, you have an office in Europe, then you are fine. The problem is if you're not established, then under Article 27 of the GDPR, you will need to kind of evaluate your data flows. You'll need to see where you are getting the most of your kind of data from. So if there's one country in particular, then you should pick that country in Europe and get a representative based in that country, and then they will essentially be the kind of face of your organization in that country, and they'll forward you requests, things like that. If you are, and just to preempt the question, if you're selling across Europe, or if you have a business interest and you're collecting data across Europe, then it's less important where your EU rep is, but it's definitely better to have it in the place where you get the most data from. If it's all kind of equal, then there's not much you can do there. But to your best ability, try and locate your rep in the place where you're collecting the most EU data subject information. So yeah, with the EU rep, if you have any further questions, my email's on the screen here, I believe. Yep. So feel free to shoot me an email and we'll go from there. What else have we got? I think there's one more question here. You mentioned automated risk identification. One of the issues with this is it can make the business think they are managing risk in the right way, when this may not be the case. Surely this should be done in conjunction with a good risk culture. Yeah, I would fully agree. I would fully agree. And so on the Predetect platform, we have some automated risk functions, but generally we do encourage, as with most compliance processes, I think the best way to approach them is to first just sit yourself down and think about it yourself. Really just spend some time to, and this kind of links with data mapping exercises, which by this point you should probably be able to tell that I'm a big fan of, because it gives you such a great insight. So in terms of, let me get back on topic here. What was the question? The risk identification. I think there is a huge problem. You're right. There is a huge risk. Ironically, there is a huge risk of thinking you're approaching risk in the right way, especially with automated tools, things like that. But a good risk culture is definitely needed. It's hard to implement, and this is what I was talking about before, when there should be some kind of co-working with, there should be some interdepartmental work here, especially with I would say the IT department. Obviously, it depends on the organization, but generally they will have an extremely good understanding of a lot of the technical risks, and with those in particular, those are of course generally, those are the ones that will put the most customer data, etc., at risk. So if you work with the IT department on this, you can really hammer out your TOMs, your technical organizational measures. And with that in mind, and with everyone working together, the risk culture will be developed in a positive way. So hopefully that answers the question, but I fully agree that a good risk culture is important. And to achieve that, I think the communication is extremely valuable. I think that's the final question there. So thank you everyone for joining. If you have any further questions or you want to reach out or get a demo or anything like that, then feel free to shoot me an email. My email's on there, charles.malleytrevitt@predetect.com. Thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And I hope you have a lovely afternoon. Thank you very much.